Let me begin with an uncomfortable observation. Many of our churches no longer burn in prayer. Prayer meetings are thin, intercession is polite, urgency is drained out of our petitions. We pray, but often the prayers feel routine, like a formality before the real work of ministry begins. But then something interesting happens. A church begins engaging Muslims. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes. The questions become heavier. The dependence becomes deeper. And the prayers, those sleepy, predictable prayers, begin to sound different. They become desperate, focused, and persistent. The temperature rises. Why? Because when the church steps onto the frontier of mission, when it begins to engage people who have not heard the gospel clearly, the church rediscovers how much it needs God. Today I want to argue something simple but deeply theological. Frontier mission raises the prayer temperature of the church because it forces us to confront the supernatural nature of salvation and the cosmic scope of Christ's kingdom. And nowhere is this more evident today than in ministry to Muslims. So let's look at this. One, the harvest reveals the church's poverty. Matthew chapter 9, verses 36 through 38. Let's begin where Jesus begins. Matthew tells us, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like a sheep without a shepherd. The crowds were not merely uninformed, they were spiritually helpless. Jesus then says something extraordinary. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest. Notice what Jesus does. He does not first command strategy. He commands prayer. But why? Because the harvest belongs to God. The field is His. The workers are His, and the fruit is His. And when the church begins to see the vastness of the harvest, it suddenly realizes something about itself. We are radically insufficient. Now think about the Muslim world. Nearly 2 billion people. Entire civilization shaped by a theological system that explicitly denies the central claims of Christianity. That Jesus is the Son of God, that Christ died for sins, that cross secures salvation. Many Muslims have never once heard the gospel explained clearly. And when a church begins to see that reality, not as statistics, but as people made in the image of God, something happens. The illusion of control collapses. Programs feel small. Techniques feel fragile. And suddenly, pastors begin praying the prayer Jesus commanded. Lord of the harvest, send workers. The frontier reveals the church's poverty, and poverty drives us to prayer. 2, conversion is supernatural. But there is a deeper reason the prayer temperature rises. Muslim ministry exposes the supernatural nature of conversion. Jesus says in John 6:44, no one can come to me unless the Father who has sent me draws him. No one. Not the secular skeptic, not the moral religious person, and not the devout Muslim. Conversion is not persuasion alone. It is resurrection. Paul describes the conditions of unbelief this way. The God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers. 2 Corinthians 4:4. Blindness is not cured with better arguments alone. Blindness requires light, and that light must come from God Himself. When pastors begin engaging Muslims, they quickly discover this. Muslims often know the religion well. They have thought deeply about theology. They can raise serious objections. You realize very quickly this is not merely an intellectual conversation. This is a spiritual battle over sight and blindness. And once you understand that prayer stops being optional, it actually becomes oxygen, you begin praying things like, God, open his eyes. Lord, reveal Christ. Father, draw him to your Son. Muslim ministry reminds the church of something we had almost forgotten. Salvation belongs to the Lord. 3. Mission is spiritual warfare. Ephesians 6:12. Paul tells us plainly, we do not wrestle with flesh and blood. Islam is not simply another cultural tradition. It is a comprehensive religious system that forms identity, family, law, and a worldview. To follow Christ in many Muslim contexts is not merely a personal decision. It can mean losing family, losing community, and losing livelihood. And when churches begin to understand the cost facing Muslim seekers, the atmosphere shifts again. Prayer becomes warfare. Paul continues in Ephesians 6, praying at all times in the Spirit, making supplications for all the saints. Notice the connection. Spiritual warfare is sustained through persistent prayer. Churches that engage Muslims often rediscover this ancient Christian truth. The kingdom advances not merely through preaching, but through praying churches. 4. Christ is claiming worshipers from every nation. Revelation 5:9. But there's an even deeper reason the prayer temperature rises, because the church begins to glimpse the cosmic ambition of Christ. Revelation 5 gives us a picture of the end of history. Heaven sings, worthy are you, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God and from every tribe and language and people and nation. Let's say it again, every tribe, every language, every nation. That includes Persians, Turks, Arabs, and Kurds, Indonesians, and Somalis. Christ did not die only for Western nations. He died to gather a global people. And when pastors begin to realize that the Muslim world represents one of the largest remaining frontiers of the Great Commission, something happens. The church begins to feel the weight of history. We begin to ask, what role will our church play in the global purpose of Christ? The question fuels prayer, because suddenly our local congregation is connected to a cosmic story. 5. Why Muslim ministry raises the prayer temperature. When a church begins engaging Muslims, several theological realities collide all at once. The church sees the vastness of the harvest. The church remembers the supernatural nature of conversion. The church confronts spiritual warfare. And the church glimpses the global ambition of Christ. When these truths become real, prayer cannot remain casual. It becomes urgent. Churches that engage Muslim ministry often testify prayer meetings grow. Session deepens. Believers begin fasting. People pray for names and faces, not just abstract categories. Why? Because the church has stepped onto the front line to the Great Commission. 6. Pastoral word for shepherds. Pastors, many of us long for revival in our prayer meetings. Praying rarely happens in isolation. Prayer flourishes when the church reconnects with the mission of God. One reason our prayer meetings struggle may be that we have drifted too far from the frontier. But when the church begins praying for Muslim neighbors, when believers start building relationships with Muslims at work or school, when stories begin circulating about conversations, questions, and seekers, suddenly the prayer meeting has something to pray about, and the spiritual temperature rises. Let me conclude with this: the glory of Christ among the nations. In the end, the goal of Muslim ministry is not merely revitalize prayer meetings. The goal is the glory of Christ. One day, Muslims who recited the Shahada will stand before the throne of Jesus. They will join the song of Revelation. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. And pastors, imagine the joy of knowing that your church, your ordinary congregation, playing a small role in the global symphony of worship. And that story begins where Jesus told us it must begin. Paul prayed earnestly to the Lord of the harvest. And when the church steps into the frontier of mission, it discovers something beautiful. The prayer temperature rises because we remember again the harvest is His, the power is His, and the nations belong to Christ.